Well, hey there, welcome back. This is week 3. We're in our second to last week, and this week we're going to talk about monetization. We're going to talk about marketing. We're going to talk about organic and paid growth, which I guess is marketing. And rather than give you a long preface or, welcome, we're just going to jump right into it. So there aren't going to be too many presentations this week, more like screen shares, tutorials, walking you through processes, and then stuff like this where I'm speaking directly to you. So let's pull up our desktop, and I will pop my tiny head, my fat head, but I'll make it tiny. My tiny head down in the corner, somewhere down here, and then we will go ahead and get started. Okay. Why paid marketing is necessary. That's right. You cannot just rely on awesoming yourself to success. Now, I want to start before I even get into marketing, let's talk about this. In fact, let me bring my face back up because I want to speak directly to you on this. I want you to really, really vibe with what I'm saying. No one really knows how to grow a podcast. This is what usually happens. Someone has great success. They start a podcast and it's wonderful. Takes off right away. I have a great example of this. My podcast, Practical Stoicism, never marketed it. Never, not once. Didn't tweet. I ran like a 1-week billboard ad in LA. Got like 200 listeners. Ran a Facebook ad for like a week. Got like 100 listeners. Ran one in-app ad. I think I got like 50 listeners, so not a lot of marketing. That podcast now has 50,000 individual listeners and gets nearly 300,000 downloads a month, and that's all the marketing I ever did to it. If you visit the Twitter account for it, there's like one tweet. If you visit the Facebook account for it, there's like one post that's just pinned to the top that says, here's all the places you can find the podcast. So I never really did any marketing. And yet that podcast is the most successful podcast I've ever had of my own. Not compared to some of my clients, but of my own. And I don't know how it happened. I just made good content and made it available and then never really talked about it. And what will happen is that will happen to some people. And their response to that will be, I know how to grow a podcast because I did it. I did it. So they'll falsely attribute the things they did to their success. And that's not always a fair thing to be able to do. Because as you can see in my case, there was an X factor that I can't account for. I don't know what it was. It wasn't marketing because I didn't do that much of it. And this is true of a lot of podcast gurus. So you have to be careful about this when taking advice online, whether it's paid advice like what you're getting right now in this course, or if it's free advice. You have to be aware of the fact that if somebody has only had success once, that they are probably not in full comprehension or have a full understanding of what they did that worked. So when those people turn around and try to teach you or give you advice based on what they did with their singular success, don't listen to them because they don't really know what they did. They know that they did some things and they were successful, but they don't know that the success was a direct result of the things they did. It's easy for them to think it was, but until somebody has been able to do this repeatedly, time after time, to show a process, to show that this is a falsifiable process through which you can go to achieve these results, they don't really know what they did. They just had success, and they did some things. And they're connecting those two and saying they must be related, but that's not always the case. Now, it seems as though I'm telling you not to listen to me in that case, right? Well, I have a lot of clients. I've helped thousands of students. I have thousands of hours of consulting under my belt, and I have that process. Can I guarantee that everything I'm about to tell you in marketing is going to result in you having 1 million downloads a month? Absolutely not. But I can tell you that these things are necessary things, common things, amongst every client I've ever had who's had success. So these aren't necessarily the things that make you successful, but of the clients I've had who have found great full-time or part-time success from a monetary standpoint, they all had these things in common. They had these things. And the ones that didn't never found success. So these are best practices, things that I have identified over thousands of students and hundreds of clients, the things that the winners always have. It's not a guarantee. It's saying this is what winners have, and when they're winners, they have these things, and when they're losers, meaning they're just not successful in generating income, I'm not making personal judgments, they don't have these things. It just happens that they don't have these things. Okay? So, here we go. Put my little face back down here in the corner. All right. The long, slow tail of organic. Organic means that something has happened naturally. You haven't paid to create unnaturally occurring interactions with your content. When you make a post on Twitter and someone sees it, that's organic. When you create an ad on Twitter and someone sees it, that's not organic, that's paid. So to just make sure you understand here, organic is what happens naturally. You create a tweet, you put a hashtag in it, and somebody comes across that tweet as they're exploring that hashtag or because they follow you. That's organic. That can happen on Facebook, Twitter, it can happen in Google. It can happen on Pinterest. It can happen on any social platform. It can happen anywhere. Organic is powerful, but it takes time to accrue its power or its effect because it is based on your total body of work. It is also unpredictable and impossible to control. Let me talk a little bit about what I mean by it takes time to accrue because it's based on your total body of work. So let's imagine Google. Google is a form of organic discovery. You search for a particular kind of, and again, I'll bring my face up here. You search for a particular kind of content. Let's say you're looking for, well, let's do a real life example. Actually, I think this will drive home the point. I'll just pull up Google. Okay, here we have Google, and I want to search for podcast about Thanksgiving. 12 Thanksgiving podcasts to gobble up. These are organic results. The reason that these results are appearing on the first SERP, search engine result page of Google, is because they've had time to accrue a few things. Podchaser.com is our first result. There's something called domain authority. And I think we can probably get that from Ahrefs. So if we search podchaser.com and we check the authority of this domain and promise that I'm not a robot and then identify all of the motorcycles, it will give me an estimate of their domain rating, 0 to 100. They have a domain rating or a domain authority rating of 81. That's quite high. Now, by contrast, I'm going to close this and I'm going to search my own domain authority, tannerhelps.com. Also, I'm not a robot, and this time I'll identify traffic lights. My domain authority is only 26. So let me tell you how this plays out. I don't have a podcast episode about Thanksgiving, but if I did, Google would say, hey, here's a result at tannerhelps.com and here's a result at Podchaser. Which one of these domains has more authority and influence? Oh, Podchaser. So we're definitely going to put that domain well before we put tannerhelps.com because that has much lower domain authority than does Podchaser.com. So that's part of what's happening in in an organic search, or rather in a search on Google. Now, sometimes you might search for something like a cool pen for school. And at the top, you'll get advertisements. This is paid marketing. This is not organic. And here we have organic results. Country Living has done a great job of creating a website that Google sees as being the most relevant returned result for this query. The other part of that is their domain authority. The other part of what determines your ranking in a Google search isn't just the domain authority, but it's the amount of time that you've been around, the amount of traffic you're getting to your site, the amount of content on the page, which suggests to Google that the content on the page is actually a good match for the query. So the amount of time you've been around, your domain authority, the content on the page, and some other things that I'm not smart enough to know about, all conspire to inform Google how high you should rank on a relevant query. Now, if I were to search my name, there I am, first result. There are probably other Tanner Campbells, here they are, but I'm the one that has the strongest domain authority of all the Tanner Campbells, and I'm the one who writes the most, and I'm the one who has the best online presence, and so here I am getting almost all the results. All of these are me, with the exception of this guy at Amazon. He's not me. And this is domain authority combined with content on the page, combined with length of time I've been around, and Google can figure out that based on the query Tanner Campbell, there's a really good chance that this is probably the guy you're looking for. And then maybe this guy and this guy, but it's most likely you're looking for this guy. And if I put Tanner Campbell podcast, well, then it's all going to be me. Because if Tanner Campbell, if there's a podcast king amongst all Tanner Campbells, it's me. So I'm the only result now. Now, one of the reasons that this is true is, I have a lot of content online, a ton of it. I mean, I've written thousands of blog entries. I've been on hundreds of podcasts, probably. I have hundreds of podcasts of my own out there with my name associated with them. I have an extremely active Twitter account. I'm all over the place. But it took time. And let me switch back to the camera here. It took time to accrue that body of work, and that body of work is what's working for me in a Google search to make it so that I come up when somebody searches my name. If I was just Tanner Campbell and I didn't have a blog and I didn't have a podcast and I didn't have courses and I didn't have a website and I wasn't active on Twitter and I didn't have an Instagram, well then why the hell would I come up? I have no body of work. It would be some other Tanner Campbell. So body of work, length of time in existence, and domain authority are three things that contribute to you being found organically in a Google search. Now let's take that over to Twitter. I'm going to just visit Twitter really quickly. So here's Twitter. Let's look at some of the things I'm just seeing in my timeline here. And yes, my avatar is a man with a cookie face and a Dr. Livingston hat on. Yes, you're seeing that correctly. I can see that I'm seeing a tweet from Jerry Dugan 8 minutes ago. I'm also seeing an ad from the New York Times. I'm also seeing a tweet from whoever this is. I'm also seeing a tweet from Harry Duran and the Notoriously Nerdy podcast. Now, the reason that these are the things I'm seeing is because Twitter's algorithm, which you hear so much about, is doing something right now. It's trying to determine what I would most like to see. And for whatever reason, my interactions with Jerry Dugan have been such that they're thinking that's probably the first thing I'd like to see. Now, I just met Jerry Dugan at Podcast Movement just a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's interesting that since I've met him, and we've been having more conversations on Twitter and in email, that I'm now seeing him as a priority on my timeline, because this is not in order of time. It's in order of what Twitter thinks I would most like to see. Now, if I went up here to these little sparkles and I changed this to see latest tweets instead, I would see more like in the order in which things were being tweeted and people I followed. That's what I would then see. But how come I didn't see Cooper's retweet of Dylan Redekop's newsletter strategy tweet? Why didn't I see that? I follow him, but I didn't see that in the default timeline layout. It's going to show me top tweets first. But this has one retweet, and this one has 3 likes. So top tweet doesn't mean most popular among anyone who's seen it. It means most likely to be interesting to me. So organic discovery is hard because I follow 2,400 people, but when I'm on my Twitter page, I'm not seeing 2,400 tweets. I'm seeing what Twitter tells me I should be interested in seeing most, which are these. So there could be people making tweets right now that I would love to see, and they would love me to see, but the Twitter algorithm doesn't think I need to see them, and they're not prioritized in the timeline for whatever reason. And so this is hard for creators because something that people will do on Twitter is they'll tweet, hey, latest episode's out, it features so-and-so, and it's all about this. But that doesn't mean I'm going to see it, even if I follow you. Because the average person, let's Google this, average time spent on Twitter. I think it's about a half an hour, 40 minutes. The average time spent on Twitter clocks in at 3.39 minutes per session. But I'd like to know daily. 34.8 minutes. As of 2022, this is where people are spending most of their time. About 45 minutes on TikTok, the same on YouTube, the same on Twitter per day. Now, if the algorithm is deciding for me what I'm going to see, and I'm only on here for 35 minutes a day, which is not true for me, I'm on it a lot more, but if I'm the average person who's only going to be on here for 35 minutes a day, how would it even be possible for me to see all of the tweets of the 2,458 people I follow? That seems impossible. There's no way. And so the algorithm has to work to guess. This is one of the challenges of organic discovery when you're marketing on Twitter. So we've talked about YouTube, we've talked about Twitter. I want you to apply everything I just said about Twitter to Facebook. It's the same thing. You follow a lot of people, you follow a lot of pages, you can't see them all because you don't spend enough time on the platform on a daily basis, and so the algorithm works to show you what they think you want to see. Now, another reason that I don't necessarily see tweets that are promoting things is that, well, those things send me off platform. So here's a tweet from my friends at Afropods. Are you an African podcaster? Share your link to your podcast below. Your new audience is waiting for you. Go. Now that's not sending me anywhere. It's asking me to engage on this platform, which Twitter would really like. Twitter wants me on their platform because the more I'm on their platform, the more ads I see, the more money they make. But down here, this sends me away from the platform. If I click on this, I'm not going to because then it's going to affect the ads I see. But if I click on this, it's going to take me to zenledger.io. This is an ad. Usually when you're on a social platform and you're attempting to send people off the social platform, whether you're a personal account or a business account or a creator account, the platform is going to deprioritize your natural discovery, your organic discovery on the platform because it doesn't want you to be sending people off-site. Now, in Twitter's case, let's look at some of these. This keeps me on site. This keeps me on site. This keeps me on site. On site. Here's another thing that takes me off site. Oh, that's an ad. Now, here's my take on, I don't know what this is, but this is like a blog post, I guess. The absurdity is reality. This does take me off site. So it doesn't not ever show organic links to off-site stuff, but it doesn't show them as frequently as it shows, as you can very clearly see, tweets that don't do that. This is another ad. This is not sending me anywhere. This is not sending me anywhere. This is not sending me anywhere. This is another ad. It is not common that you'll come across links that send you off platform. This is another ad. You see the pattern here. The platform wants to keep you on the platform. And so if you're tweeting to share things to another place, it's not as likely that you'll be discovered. So you've got a couple things working against you. You've got the fact that the platform wants to keep you on platform, so they're not going to let you, they're going to cap your organic discovery such that it's less likely people see tweets that ask them to go to other places. And you're also dealing with the fact that I can only see so many tweets in a given time, right? I can only see so many tweets in a given time period. And I'm only on it for 35 minutes a day. Same for Facebook, same for Pinterest, same for anything, okay? So I'm going to go back to the presentation here, and we're going to keep going. Organic can be part of your strategy for brand discovery and growth, but it cannot be your only strategy because you will be irrelevant for a very long time before the algorithms of search or social think you're a good match for what people want. That's going back to talking about what I was talking about on about Google search result pages. I'm going to go ahead and put my face back down here again. But that's also true on platforms. When somebody who has a verified account and 6 million followers, like the President of the United States or something, that person is going to more frequently get away with being able to send people off site. And that probably, I'm guessing here, that probably has something to do with the fact that they bring so many people to the platform and engage so many people on the platform. So maybe they get a little leniency there. Discovery in general, so we're now switching away from organic paid, we're just going to talk about discovery in general in podcasting, is a problem. Currently, discovery is driven by one of three things: in-app search, popularity, and trending titles. I want to give you an example of this. We're going to open up our browser again. And we're going to open up Apple Podcasts. We're going to try to make this larger. I'm not having a good time. There we go. And we're just going to go to Browse. Now let's look at the podcasts that I have in here. Celebrating the abundance of our communities. Now, it just so happens that at time of recording, it has just been Mexican Independence Day, and I believe the start of Latin American Month, I think, or Latin Heritage Month, Spanish Heritage Month. So I'm seeing some stuff that's relevant to the date, to what's going on in the world from a global or national standpoint. So I'm seeing some Latin specific creators up here. This has nothing to do with what I would like to see. This has to do with what Apple would like to promote. Now I have new and noteworthy. So these are podcasts that are somehow chosen by Apple to be and are considered to be new and noteworthy, like the label says, our current favorites. Now there's a little bit of a tell there, right? Our current favorites. Is this hand-selected? Some of it probably is. Now, I don't have anything against Anderson Cooper as a person in particular, but I would never listen to this show. I don't consume news podcasts. Cheekies and Chill, I probably would not watch that. Internal Affairs, Dateline, I'm not really into true crime stuff. Heaven Bent, I'm not sure exactly what that is. The Red Note, these are not podcasts that I would even click on to try to listen to. So these are things that I guess the people at Apple are working hard to promote for different reasons than these, but for some reason. And maybe even these podcasts are popular amongst listeners, and so Apple is assuming that because they're popular, that I might like them. So this is maybe a popularity play. This is a relevance to the date kind of play up here. And if we keep going down here, we have Get the Full Drop on Binge Plus. So these are probably podcasts that are using Apple's relatively new, at least at time of recording, it's less than a year old, I think, relatively new subscription platform, so you can create and release only on Apple, and you can charge for that. So these look like those kinds of shows. If I click on this, Mystic Mother, you can see that it's $4.99 a month, or I can try it for free. So now they're promoting things that bring them money. So this has nothing to do with really what I would like. These are just suggestions. Then we can explore collections, the dark side. Well, if I click on that, I'm going to see, I guess, maybe true crime, law, occult podcast. These things aren't anything I would actually watch. I don't watch these kinds of shows. Award-winning, binge-worthy, immersive fiction. These are more in line with things I would watch because I like immersive fiction, or I would listen to. But I've never listened to any of these shows, and they're certainly not based on my expressed behavior or anything like that as a listener on Apple Podcasts. So what I'm getting at here is, on Apple Podcasts, you're not seeing suggestions based on what you would like. You're seeing suggestions based on what's going on right now as like a holiday or an awareness month, things that they think are new and noteworthy or popular. And popular does not mean necessarily interesting to you. It just means popular. Things that are going to bring them money here, and then some other categories that are probably hand-selected and curated. Optimize your fall routine. Okay, so this is about, optimizing or something. I would not watch a single I wouldn't be interested in any of these. Literally none of these would I watch. Maybe not all songs considered. Maybe all things considered, but that's not even here. What should I read next? I might watch that. I actually know the guys at Ratchet Book Club. I would probably listen to that, though I haven't. Everything on here has nothing to do with anything I like. And it's probably true for you, too, when you log on to Apple Podcasts. But Apple Podcasts is getting a little bit better at this. In fact, on the mobile version of the app, I will find things that are more somehow tuned to me. They're at least in the same category of podcasts that I listen to, and sometimes the suggestions are pretty spot on. But 90% of the time, it's this kind of recommendation, popularity-based, or things that are going to bring Apple money, or things that they think personally are good. Now, if we look at Spotify, let's see if we find something different with Spotify, which I will have to pull up a different browser to do because Brave doesn't like Spotify running on a desktop for some reason. Oh, that doesn't want to go full screen for some reason. So I'll go to play.spotify.com. And I do a lot of my listening on Spotify, so I would hope to see some relevancy here. You can see I follow my friend Jonathan, the Your Mentor podcast, and then I have kind of my podcast here because I proof listen to them after I publish them. So let me go to search, and I want to look at podcasts. Well, let's see if Spotify does a better job of guessing what I might like. Best episodes, editors' picks. So these are things that the editors like. Best of Brown Bag. That's a specific podcast. So far, no. Money motivation, categories. Well, I don't see really great suggestions here either. Let's go home. Recommended radio. This is all stuff I would listen to. I actually like every single band on here, so they're doing a great job of discovery with music. More of what you like, music, fans of Real Big Fish, the state of music today. Do we see anything here about podcasts? Don't see anything here about podcasts. So at least on the desktop version, we're not seeing anything much better here. Yep, not too good. Now I'll tell you that on the app, again on the mobile app, the discovery is a little bit better. I will see suggestions for shows that actually relate to the kind of content I like. But on the desktop experience, as you can see, not too great. And in both cases, Apple and Spotify, not too great. Let's go ahead and return to this. Popularity means that other people like it. Trending means that a podcast is growing in listenership at a steady clip. So there are trending sections in both Spotify and Apple Podcasts as platforms where they'll identify podcasts that are kind of on the rise and they'll suggest those to you. But just because something is popular doesn't mean you'll like it. And just because other people are increasingly listening to, podcast XYZ, that doesn't mean you'll like it either. There is no such thing as interest, behavioral, demographic, podcast to listener matching outside of Spotify. And this is because Spotify earlier this year acquired a company called Pods and has been attempting since then, Pods was a discovery engine, to implement that technology into Spotify. So of all the mobile apps for listening to podcasts that do the best job at studying your behavior and then making relevant suggestions to you, it's Spotify. And you noticed while we were looking at Spotify that I had a lot of on-the-ball suggestions for music. And you probably experienced this too with, for example, Pandora or Slacker Radio. They study your behavior, they watch what you listen to, and then they make suggestions based on that behavior. Well, that kind of thing doesn't exist in podcast discovery, which is one of the problems with podcast discovery. So the odds of someone finding your podcast are very slim, and marketing them organically is taxing. So again, if I open up, let's say, Apple Podcasts, my podcast isn't anywhere on here, right? So I might search for a philosophy podcast, or let's say I search for true crime. That's more popular, I think, than philosophy. Okay, so here are some suggestions, and this is what's going to happen, right? You have a podcast that might be a true crime podcast, or whatever it is. When people search for it, they're going to get results like this. These are very popular. This is from AudioChuck, from Wondery, from ABC, from AudioChuck. These are big production companies, big studios. This is from AudioChuck, NBC News. So the first suggestions we're getting are immensely popular podcasts, not small independent creators who just started last week or have been around even for years. We're not seeing those. We're seeing the most popular. Here we have channels. Again, Netflix has 19 podcast shows. I'm not Netflix. Tenderfoot TV, HLN, Dateline NBC, CBC True Crime, which I believe is Canadian, AudioChuck, Wondery, and then down here we have individual episodes. Well, now this is getting a little less ABC-ish and big brand, but there's still a lot of it in there, right? So you're an independent nobody, but you have a true crime podcast. Well, how the hell is somebody going to find you? Because the first thing they're going to search is true crime, and they're going to see this. Well, let's say they click see all in the results. So let's scroll down and load some more stuff. I don't really see anything that's not, Audio Boom, AudioChuck, Incongruity. These are all kind of established production companies. C13 Originals, NBC. We're not really seeing what I think all of us, here's Nancy Grace, for goodness sake, we're not seeing what all of us would think of as independent. Now, at some point, Podcast on the Left was independent. At some point, Lore was independent. And when I say independent, I don't mean simply that they are laboring under their own skill sets and they don't have any help. I mean they're indie, they're small time, they're amateur, and they're working to become popular. At one point that was Lore and they made it. And at one point that was the last Podcast on the Left and they made it. But you're seeing that a lot of these days are from big studios. And so you're competing against this. I mean, even my podcast, which I told you gets 300,000 downloads a month right now. If I search for philosophy podcast, it ain't here. And if I click on see all, I don't see it. I don't see it. I don't see it. It's a philosophy podcast, but I don't see it. I'll go all the way to the end of this just to kind of prove the point. I could be at the very bottom, but are you going to scroll this long to find the philosophy podcast you're going to listen to today? Are you going to scroll all the way down to the bottom of this 200 or so list? Probably not. Still don't see it. Still don't see it. Still don't see it. Am I making my point here? Okay, well, Tanner, you have a philosophy podcast that's about Stoicism. Maybe if we search Stoicism, we could find it. I'm actually right here. I'll tell you what the reason for that is. Part of it is that I grow episode over episode, and so I've been identified as popular within this very specific kind of philosophy. The other kind is that I have the word Stoicism in the name of my show. And you might notice here that so does this one. And this one has Stoic, and this one has Stoicism, and this one is Stoic, and this one is Stoicism, and this one is Stoic, and this one is Stoicism. This one doesn't. But most of these results for Stoicism have the word Stoic or Stoicism in the title of the show, which I've talked about in previous weeks, how important that is. See all Stoicism shows. I probably rank fairly high. I am number 2. That's actually very pleasant to see. I didn't know that, at least here. But in order for me to get here, because I tell you I did not start here, in order for me to get here, I have had to grow at a clip that is unbelievable. 300,000 downloads a month after just 8 or 9 months of creating the podcast. This is not easy to achieve. And if we scroll way down here, we can find podcasts that are more like by regular people that have to do with Stoicism but are harder to find. Running for Real, for example. If you were the creator of Running for Real and your podcast was about Stoicism, which I'm guessing it must be because here it is for some reason in the results, how the hell would I find this podcast? The Alpha Male Buddhist, which is, there's so many things wrong with that. But let's say I was the Alpha Male Buddhist. How in the world am I going to find this podcast? Even if it's something I'd be really interested in. If I search for Buddhism, am I going to find this podcast? It's not here. It's not in the episode list. If I go to view all, am I going to see it here? Maybe it's more popular than I think it is. Am I going to find this thing? How am I going to find it? There it is right here, probably result number, I don't know, let's say 80 out of what's here. So I would have had to have searched for Buddhism, and then I would have had to have not just ignored the first page of results here, but I would have had to have known to click on shows to see all the shows in this category, and then I would have had to scroll down to the 80th or so result. Discovery sucks in podcasting. It's terrible. Because what should happen is that when I search Buddhism, the first thing I should see are results that are not popular, not trending, but the ones based on my listening behavior that are most likely to be of interest to me. And then it's up to the creator to try to, title their episodes correctly and title their show correctly and make sure that Apple has all it needs to do for podcast searches what Google does for web searches, which we went over at the beginning of this video. So discovery is terrible. And you need to know that going into podcasting because, well, there'll be some other depressing facts in this presentation, in this video, but you need to know going into it that if you think you're going to launch and get 1,000 listens, well, you are dead wrong. That is not going to happen unless you have a really great pre-launch strategy. And I've never seen anyone launch with any small-time, first-time creator launch with 1,000 listens per episode. Most podcast consumption happens, in fact, across just a few hundred individual podcasts. Let's call it 1,000. That means of 5 million plus podcasts, a few hundred are getting more than half of all the listens that happen in podcasting. So until this problem is solved, growing a podcast downloads is incredibly difficult. as evidenced by the fact that 50% of all podcasts have fewer than 100 listeners. 1%. 38,000 listens per episode. That makes you a 1%er. I want to show you where this data comes from. So we'll open up our browser again, and we'll go to Omni Studio. Now, these numbers might have changed a little because this data, I think, is from 2020, and it's 2022 currently. But if I go to the blog at Omni Studio, and I come down here to By the Numbers, and one of the charts they have is how many downloads per episode is good. Top 50% of podcasts, 50% of all podcasts. Episode downloads 30 days after publishing an episode, 100 or less. Top 20%, 740 or less. Top 10%, 1,800 or less. Top 5, 4,300 or less. Top 2, 13,000 or less. Top 1, 28,000 or less. In order to be a top 1% podcast, 28,000 listens per episode within 30 days of that episode's release. And 50% of us have fewer than 100. 50, 60, 70, 80, 85. 85% of us have fewer than 4,300 downloads per episode. 50, 60, 70 of us have fewer than 740. It is hard to grow a podcast. And the biggest reason for that is, well, partially, sometimes content sucks. People don't do a good job. Nobody wants to listen to it. It's terrible. But the thing that hurts us the most is that this industry is more and more commercialized. As you could see with the Apple Podcasts app, when we look at the front page, this is CNN, for God's sake. This is NBC News. These people are spending a lot of money on their productions, on their marketing. They're sending people to their shows. They probably have some sort of arrangement with Apple for being featured. I don't know that for sure, but it would make sense, wouldn't it? And doesn't Apple Podcasts want to make sure that the podcasts they're suggesting are the ones people will like? Isn't that better than suggesting John and Mary's Basement True Crime podcast on shitty $1 microphones that sounds like shit? I mean, from Apple's standpoint, it probably makes sense too. But discovery hurts us. It hurts us a lot. You need to understand how hard it is to grow a show. It's an uphill battle all the way. And then one day it's not. But until it's not, it is. Podcasting is also currently decentralized. This is another problem. Decentralized, in this case, just means podcasting doesn't happen in one place. You've already seen that, right? You can listen to my podcast on Spotify, on Apple, on Overcast, on Podchaser, on Fountain, on any number of apps. I store the audio in a single place, sounder.fm, and then I distribute it to multiple places. So it's centrally distributed, but it's decentrally listened to. That means if Apple Podcasts decides they don't want to let me have my show and they deplatform me, that's okay. I still have the freedom to distribute everywhere else. And that is something that a lot of the old timers in podcasting, which I kind of am one, I guess, not quite as old as some, but I've been in it since 2010. Others have been in it since it started in 2005, 2006. Some of us feel very strongly that the decentralized nature of podcasting is about protecting freedom of speech. You'll hear that argument a lot about RSS. But other people, myself included, think that this decentralized distribution prevents us all, meaning our podcast could only be listened in one place instead of multiple places. It makes marketing harder. It means that your marketing strategies are necessarily split across dozens and dozens of platforms, which is incredibly difficult to maintain and, of course, very impractical. Your content might be everywhere, but you can't be. Imagine you have $100 a month to spend on marketing. Well, where are you going to spend it? If there are 100 places people are listening, you're going to spend $1 on each platform? It's not very effectual. you're going to want to invest that money in the places where most of your listeners are. And that is increasingly Spotify podcasts, followed number 2 by Apple, and then a very, very, very distant third is Google Podcasts. The future of the podcasting landscape, in my estimation, this is just me theorizing, is going to be centralized. Podcasting is likely to abandon RSS distribution in the not too distant future. And the reasons for this are directly related to the discovery problem in podcasting. It is easier to build an audience on a closed platform because a closed platform can study user behavior and use it to promote your podcast to people who would like it. Again, going back to that example in Spotify, when I go to search for music, let's say I want to search for, I don't know, or I'll just go to my homepage, I guess. It's making all a bunch of suggestions here. These are Less Than Jake, love him. Jack Johnson, love him. English Beat, love him. Hugh Laurie, love his albums. Streetlight Manifesto, Joy Division, Rancid, Frank Turner, Dropkick Murphys. I love all of these suggestions. And it knows that because it knows I listen to these. Here's some more of what I might like. 90s rock anthems? Yeah, that's probably give or take. Rock classics? Absolutely. Best of rock from 1998? Yeah, probably. Classic rock workout? Absolutely. 2000s indie scene? Maybe a little, maybe not. All out 70s, 100%. 90s rock drive? Probably. Like, these are good, solid suggestions. I don't see a single, maybe Viva Latino. Oh, well, this is underneath. These aren't suggestions anymore. This is the state of music today. So these are probably trending popular artists. My top mixes. It's even creating mixes for me. And these platforms can do this because they spy on me. Now, I know that sounds terrible, but what they're doing while I'm using their platform is keeping a record of what I'm doing. People don't like that kind of data collection, but in this case, what are they doing? They're watching what I listen to, and then what are they doing with that information? Well, they're marketing to me things that I would like to listen to, which seems more helpful than harmful to me. So I think that the future of podcasting, because of, in the case of music, what Spotify or any closed platform could bring to podcast creators, which, if I'm not being clear, is the ability to get your show in front of people who want to hear it, instead of just getting popular shows by massive studios with millions of dollars to spend on marketing in front of people who might want to hear them. I think that that's where creators are going to flock, because a creator doesn't want to be a web developer and a marketer and all these other things at the same time as being a creator of good content, because it's harder. And the path of least resistance is often the path most traveled. So again, back to our presentation. In a decentralized landscape like what we have, which is what we have to deal with for now, paid marketing is absolutely necessary to make up for the lack of algorithm-driven discovery. The best paid marketing is in-app. Marketing to people where they aren't listening to podcasts is a terrible strategy. You do not want to attempt to pull people from social platforms that have nothing to do with podcasting over to your podcast. This is incredibly ineffectual. You want to market to people where they are already listening to podcasts. You want to match current activity, their current activity, your target listener, their current activity with your goal, which is getting them to listen to your podcast. The way you do this is to place display ads within podcast players. The people in those apps are already listening to those players. That's why they're in them. So they're in the proper mental space to listen to yours when presented with it. No cross-platform conversion is needed here. So let me make sure that I'm being really clear here, and I'll bring up my big old face. So what I'm talking about here is, imagine you're in a movie theater. You're all by yourself. You got the whole movie theater to yourself, and you want to be there. You paid a ticket to be there. You're invested in watching, Goodfellas. That's a movie everybody seems to like. And you're eating your popcorn, and you're just like, oh, man, this is great. I can't believe I'm here. This is exactly what I wanted to do today. And then I walk in and I say, hey man, let's leave this. This is stupid. I've got the director's commentary special edition cut at my house, and I've got a great projector in the backyard. I've got a sheet up, and we can go watch the director's commentary version of this movie at my house. Let's go do that. Now, I'm not suggesting that idea is not attractive to you, who's already watching that very movie in the theater. So obviously there's some interest alignment, but I'm getting you at the wrong time, because you're in the theater and you're like, all right, this is why I'm here. I showed up for this. I've got my popcorn. It's dark in here. And it's surround sound. This is the experience I'm looking for right now. It's really hard to convince you in that state of mind to break that behavior and go experience something completely different. Most people are going to say like, yeah, maybe later. And then maybe later never comes. What is a better strategy is to walk into the theater and say, hey, after you're done listening or after you're done watching this movie, you should stay right here in this seat, because the movie's going to change and it's going to be the director's commentary, which I know you'll love. The likelihood of someone staying where they already are to continue to consume content that they like is much higher than getting them to stop being where they are, going somewhere else, getting them to go somewhere else, and engage in similar kinds of content. We don't want them to have to jump from one platform to another, or from the theater to your home on your couch outside. We want them to stay in the theater and be entertained by the next thing, right? And this is swiping, right? We're talking about movie to movie in a theater. We're talking about swiping on TikTok. I don't want to leave swiping. It's too easy. I know the next thing I swipe to is going to be something I'm going to think is funny, and if it's not, I can just skip on to the next one. Don't try to send me a video on TikTok that says, hey, I've got a great podcast episode. It just came out. Click here to listen. Oh, well, that's a long form piece of content. Swipe. I'm here swiping. I'm in swipe mode. How many times can I say swipe in this presentation? I'm in swipe mode. I'm not going to go over there and listen to an hour-long podcast with you talking about whatever. Maybe later, and then they forget. So we don't want to try to pull people over from one place to another place. We want to say, hey, you're already here. You're already in the Overcast podcast player, for example. We want you to know about our podcast, because here you are listening to podcasts right now. And hey, here's one you might like. You could listen to it next. We want to get them where they are. We don't want to have to get them. We don't want to have them take 2 steps to get somewhere just so then we can give them the thing we want to give them. We want to serve them where they are. Really wish this thing would remember that I want it down here. I would have to keep moving it. Okay. In the following few modules, we're going to be going over how to create ads within podcast apps. I can't go over all of them because there are too many, but I'm going to go over the ones that I use and the ones that I think are most affordable and best, have the best results. Some will be very expensive. Others will be very affordable. None of them are free. Of course, this is paid advertising. The one thing you need to take away from this presentation and everything you're going to get in the first half of this week is, if you want to grow, you will need to allocate a budget to paid growth. If you do not do this, you will not reliably grow. Do not leave this course and then go listen to some guru on Twitter that tells you all you need to do is repurpose your audio as an audiogram and post it to Instagram Reels, and you'll get all kinds of listeners. You'll get followers on Instagram, and that's useful for standing up a vertical of engagement and service on Instagram, but none of them are going to come over to the podcast. A great example of that, 8,000 some odd people follow me on Twitter right now about my Good Morning Podcasters account and Good Morning Podcasters, the podcast. Well, I only get a few hundred listens per episode on that podcast, but I have thousands, almost 10,000 people follow me and engage with me on Twitter. They don't become listeners. People don't jump platforms. Now, eventually, some small percent does. So eventually your presence on a platform may be so overwhelming, like you have 1 million followers, that yes, pretty reliably, maybe 0.5% of that might come over as new listeners. But 0.5% of 1 million is fairly meaningful. Half a percent of 10,000 is not incredibly meaningful. So we don't want to be moving people from social platforms or platform A to podcast platform B. We want to advertise to them in the podcast listening platforms. Now, you could get lucky and you could grow anyway. I talked about that with my show, Practical Stoicism, but that's a shit strategy. It's a terrible strategy to say, hey, you know what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a good show, and if it gets good, it gets good, and that's all I care about. Don't do that. You didn't pay money to take this course to be that lackadaisical about your future in this medium, okay? So now let's look at these platforms and run some ads. That's what we're going to do. That's in the next video, in the next few. And thanks for watching this. See you in the next one.